You explain the plan slowly, line by line. The room is quiet in the way rooms become quiet when people believe clarity will end disagreement. You outline the timeline. You define the roles. You remove every possible misunderstanding before it can appear. Heads nod around the table. Someone across from you says, "That makes sense." Another repeats a key point you made, almost word for word, as if confirming it for everyone. Agreement spreads through the room with the calm rhythm of professional cooperation. For a moment it feels settled. You leave the meeting with the quiet confidence that comes from precision. The plan is clear. Everyone understood it. Nothing ambiguous remains. But something begins to move the moment the room empties. You don't see it yet. Not because it's hidden, because you're still interpreting the room through the wrong rule. The next morning, execution slows. A task that should have started immediately doesn't begin. Someone asks a question that was already answered in the meeting. Another says they're waiting for clarification. You reread your notes. The clarification already exists. It was spoken clearly. Everyone heard it. But the movement of the plan has already shifted. Not openly, quietly. Someone is creating friction without opposing you. And that distinction matters more than you realize. Because open disagreement is simple. Open disagreement shows itself. What you're watching instead is something quieter. Agreement, followed by delay. At first you interpret it as confusion. That's the comfortable explanation. You tell yourself the meeting moved quickly. Maybe someone misunderstood a detail. So that night you send a message. Clear, structured, calm. You outline the next steps again, removing any remaining ambiguity. The response comes back quickly, encouraging. Looks good. Excited to move forward. Let's do it. The tone is cooperative, positive. Nothing in the words suggests resistance, and for a few hours the tension disappears. But the next day arrives. Nothing moves. The tasks you described remain untouched. Messages that normally receive quick responses remain unanswered for hours. Then someone finally replies, "Sorry, I thought we were waiting on confirmation." You read the sentence twice. Confirmation of what? The plan was already confirmed, but something subtle has happened. A new layer of uncertainty has been introduced into a process that was previously clear. And uncertainty has a strange effect inside groups. It slows momentum without creating visible opposition. No one has disagreed with you. No one has challenged the plan. Yet movement is quietly stopped. And the strange part is this: no one appears responsible for the delay. It's almost invisible. The pattern repeats a few days later in a different room. You're speaking with a small group. Your idea begins to attract attention. People lean forward slightly. Someone asks a question that expands the conversation. For a moment, the room rotates toward you. You can feel it. Authority doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it's just attention shifting direction. But the moment that shift begins, something else changes. Someone who had been relaxed suddenly checks their phone. Another interrupts the flow with a joke that pulls the conversation sideways. Eye contact shortens. The room cools by a few degrees. No one confronts you. No one challenges the idea. But the alignment of attention breaks apart faster than it formed. And most people miss what just happened, because it didn't look like resistance, it looked like coincidence. Later that week, someone praises your idea publicly. They repeat it in front of others with a tone of admiration. It's a strong approach, they say. You hear approval in their voice. But hours later, a message reaches you through someone else. The same person has been questioning the practicality of the idea in private conversations. Quietly, not aggressively, just enough doubt to slow enthusiasm. Praise in the open, uncertainty in private, uncertainty in private. And at first, this contradiction feels confusing, because most people believe conflict arrives directly. They expect disagreement to speak clearly. But in structured environments, hostility rarely behaves that way. It appears as cooperation, agreement, encouragement. Then something small happens afterward. A delay, a hesitation, a subtle reframing of what was already decided. The pattern becomes harder to ignore. Approval, followed by obstruction. Agreement, followed by friction, support, followed by silence. And eventually a realization begins to form, not suddenly, slowly. The room was never agreeing with you in the way you thought. Something else was happening during those nods. Something quieter than disagreement. Because inside every hierarchy, rising clarity changes the balance of the room, and when that balance shifts, people rarely resist you directly. They simply begin slowing the path beneath your feet. Most people never recognize the pattern. They keep explaining, they keep clarifying, they believe better communication will remove the resistance. But by the time you notice the delays, the room has already placed you somewhere inside its hierarchy. And the strange part is this: the moment you start seeing it, the behavior around you changes again. Because once people sense that you're watching, agreement becomes even quieter, and obstruction becomes harder to prove, which means something else about you has already been decided, not openly, not verbally, but clearly enough that the room has begun adjusting itself around your presence. You just haven't fully understood what role they placed you in yet. The deadline moves the morning after you send your progress update. You submitted the work early. Clear structure, clean documentation, nothing unfinished. You expected the update to stabilize the timeline. Instead, a message appears from management before noon. Due to scheduling changes, we'll need this completed sooner than the date that existed yesterday. No one explains what changed. No new emergency appears. No external crisis, just a quiet shift in the calendar that compresses the remaining work into a narrower window. At first it looks procedural. Deadlines move all the time, but something subtle hides inside the sequence. The change happened immediately after you demonstrated progress, which means the environment didn't respond to delay, it responded to visibility. Most people believe professional stability comes from performance, produce results, communicate clearly, deliver on time. But inside hierarchies, performance does something else first. It alters attention. And attention is a resource other people monitor carefully. You begin noticing the second pattern during meetings. A coworker leans forward while you explain a concept tied to the project. Their tone is curious, almost collaborative. They ask detailed questions, clarifying questions. Questions that invite you to expand your explanation while the rest of the room listens. The exchange feels productive. You answer calmly, methodically. The logic becomes clearer with every response. The room nods. The conversation moves on. Then 15 minutes later, the coworker speaks again. They repeat the same explanation you just gave. Not word for word, but close enough that the structure remains intact. The room acknowledges the point with quiet approval. Someone writes it down. No one mentions that the idea was already explained. The shift happens without confrontation. Credit doesn't move loudly inside professional spaces, it migrates slowly. Later that week, a group email circulates celebrating the progress of the project. The tone is polished. Great teamwork across departments. Several names appear in the message. People who attended the meetings, people who coordinated pieces of the process. Your contribution sits quietly between the lines of the work itself, but your name isn't written anywhere in the email. No accusation, no insult, just absence. An absence inside professional communication has a strange property. It can erase visibility without appearing hostile. You read the message once, then again. The omission could be accidental. That explanation feels reasonable, until someone approaches you later in the hallway with a softer warning. Just be careful, they say. Your communication style might be misunderstood. The sentence arrives without details, no specific complaint, no example. Just a vague suggestion that clarity itself might be creating tension. And that's the moment the illusion begins to fracture. Because transparency is supposed to protect reputation, explain clearly, document everything, speak directly. But the environment you're standing inside follows a quieter rule. Visibility invites interpretation. Interpretation invites quiet alignment among people who feel their position shifting. The more precisely you speak, the more carefully others begin adjusting around you, which creates a strange condition. Your work becomes visible, your logic becomes visible, your influence becomes visible. But if you challenge the patterns forming around it, credit migration, silent omissions, shifting deadlines, you trigger another rule of hierarchy. The person who names the game too clearly becomes the disturbance in the room, not the people quietly playing it. So the battlefield remains silent, political, and success begins producing a type of friction no policy document ever explains. Because in professional hierarchies, competence doesn't just create progress. Sometimes it creates pressure, and pressure makes people move pieces across the board without ever admitting a game exists. The pattern becomes easier to see once the environment changes. Not a meeting room, a social gathering. Music low in the background, people standing in small circles, conversations moving in overlapping waves across the room. You make a simple remark in a group discussion, nothing dramatic, just an observation that lands at the right moment. A woman near the edge of the circle laughs. The reaction is genuine, brief but real enough that the conversation shifts slightly toward you. For a few seconds the room adjusts, attention tilts. But before the moment can settle, another voice cuts across the space, louder. A man begins telling a story, longer, animated, slightly exaggerated. The group pivots toward the noise, not because the story is better, because it is bigger. Volume replaces precision. Within seconds, the earlier moment disappears beneath the new conversation. No one acknowledges the interruption. It doesn't look like competition, it looks like energy. But something subtle just happened. Attention was displaced before it could stabilize. And displacement inside attraction environments rarely happens by accident. You notice a similar shift later in the evening. A friend places a hand on your shoulder while speaking to the group. His tone is playful. "Don't mind him," he says. "He's always this serious." Laughter moves through the circle. The comment feels harmless, even friendly. But the effect is immediate. Your previous remark, measured, controlled, slightly analytical, suddenly appears heavier than it did a moment ago. The room adjusts its perception. Humor has reframed your presence, not aggressively, just enough. Most people believe jokes are neutral social currency, but humor inside groups often performs a quieter function. It assigns roles, the relaxed one, the entertaining one, the serious one. And once a role is assigned publicly, the room begins interpreting everything you say through it. Later, someone suggests going somewhere else after the gathering, a smaller group, drinks, a different bar across the street. The idea circulates casually. You hear fragments of the conversation, but no one addresses you directly. The plan seems loose, unstructured. Then an hour later, you notice people leaving in small clusters. Cars are arranged, rides are shared. The new location was decided somewhere inside private messages. The invitations move quietly through certain people. You weren't excluded loudly, you were simply bypassed. Selective access to social space rarely appears dramatic. It happens through soft coordination. The final shift happens near the end of the night. You're speaking with someone near the edge of the room when another man joins the conversation. His tone is casual, friendly, but during the exchange he mentions something small about you, a detail framed like a passing observation. Yeah, it can be intense sometimes. The sentence floats into the air with a relaxed smile, not criticism, just a remark. But the woman's expression changes slightly. Nothing obvious, just enough to suggest the information has been filed away somewhere inside her perception of you. Reputation doesn't always collapse through accusations. Sometimes it erodes through implication. A word here, a comment there, tiny adjustments to how others frame your presence when you're standing only a few feet away. And the strange part is this: every move remains deniable. The interruption was just enthusiasm. The joke was just humor. The redirected invitation was just miscommunication. The remark was just conversation. No single moment looks hostile, Yet across the night, something subtle has been repositioned. You remain inside the group, but the angles of attention have shifted. Because attraction environments operate like quiet arenas, men rarely declare rivalry openly. They reposition each other instead. And if you begin noticing the pattern, you also notice something else. The more composed you remain while it happens, the more carefully the room begins adjusting around you. The shift inside friendships never announces itself. It arrives quietly. One evening, you open your phone and see photos posted in a group chat. A restaurant table, drinks, familiar faces, people you normally spend time with. You scroll upward through the messages. The plan appears suddenly in the thread. Someone suggesting dinner, a few quick responses, confirmation within minutes. You weren't present for any of it. Not in the discussion. Not in the discussion. The gathering has already happened by the time you notice the conversation. Later, someone mentions it casually. Oh yeah, it was last minute. The explanation sounds harmless. Last-minute plans happen all the time, but the speed of the coordination tells a different story. Multiple people responded quickly, which means the group was active, and your absence from the thread didn't stop the plan from forming. Silence in social circles is often interpreted as neutrality, nothing personal, just timing. But the structure reveals something else. The group did not hesitate when you were missing, which means your presence was not required for the moment to move forward. That realization stays quiet in the back of your mind until another moment appears. A few days later, you're sitting with the same group. The conversation moves easily between stories and small jokes. Then someone repeats something you told them privately weeks earlier, a personal detail, framed as humor. The table laughs, not cruelly, just the light laughter that follows an unexpected anecdote. The friend who shared it smiles like it's harmless. Maybe they even glance at you to confirm the joke. But the dynamic has already shifted. Information that once existed in confidence now belongs to the group, and once a private detail becomes public entertainment, something subtle changes. Your vulnerability becomes a shared reference point. Later in the evening, someone criticizes an idea you mentioned earlier that week. Not aggressively, just mild skepticism. Several people listen quietly. Across the table, one friend, someone who supported the idea privately, remains silent. You remember the conversation clearly. In private, they agreed with you, encouraged you. But in the presence of the group, they say nothing. Not disagreement, not defense, just neutrality. Loyalty behaves differently under observation. When the room is watching, silence becomes the safest position. No one openly turns against you, but no one reinforces your position either. The atmosphere moves forward without resistance. And then the final pattern emerges. Inside jokes, small references appearing during conversations. Someone mimics the way you phrase certain things. Another exaggerates your ambition with a playful tone. You're always planning something. The group laughs again. The teasing sounds familiar, friendly. People often say that teasing is a sign of closeness, but repetition changes the function. Each joke builds a narrative about you, not one you created. One that circulates through the group until it becomes the default way your presence is interpreted. Serious, ambitious, intense. None of these labels are openly hostile. But once a group begins repeating them, the identity becomes fixed. And the strange part is this: you can feel the shift happening. Private conversations turning into public references, support dissolving in group settings, plans forming without you. But when you try to trace the origin of the change, there is no single moment to point to, no confrontation, no clear betrayal, just information moving quietly through the circle. And once trust becomes information, it stops belonging to you. It becomes currency, circulating through people who never tell you when the exchange happened. For a while, you begin adjusting your approach. Not dramatically, just small corrections. You start explaining your intentions more clearly in conversations. If a meeting becomes tense, you slow the explanation down. You outline your reasoning step by step so no one can claim confusion later. You describe what you're doing and why you're doing it. The assumption behind the adjustment feels reasonable. If the tension came from misunderstanding, then clarity should remove it. One afternoon in a meeting, you notice something different. After you finish explaining a proposal, a coworker nods immediately. This actually helps a lot, they say. Their tone is genuine, appreciative. For once the room doesn't stall, no strange silence follows the explanation. No one asks questions that were already answered. The discussion moves forward cleanly. For a moment, the atmosphere feels cooperative again. You leave the meeting with a quiet sense that something has shifted back into alignment. Maybe the earlier friction was exactly what people claimed it was: miscommunication. The same pattern appears later in social settings. During a conversation at a gathering, you decide to speak more openly than usual. You explain a point more casually. You let the conversation flow instead of keeping your remarks precise and controlled. The response from the group is calmer, no interruptions, no sudden jokes redirecting the moment. People listen. Someone agrees, another adds their own perspective without trying to replace yours. The rhythm feels natural again. For the first time in weeks, you don't feel the subtle pressure that had been appearing in conversations. The evening moves easily. Even friendships begin to feel stable again. One night you mention the earlier tension to a friend while walking outside after meeting the group. They shrug lightly. "You're probably overthinking it," they say. People misunderstand each other sometimes. Their explanation sounds simple, reasonable. The earlier moments, missed invitations, jokes, subtle comments begin to look smaller when viewed through that lens. Maybe those incidents really were coincidences. Maybe the patterns you thought you saw were just fragments of normal social noise. You start adjusting your behavior with that assumption in mind. Speak more clearly, be more open, leave less room for interpretation. The results appear encouraging. Meetings run more smoothly. Conversations feel less tense. Even the group dynamic seems to settle into a calmer rhythm. For a while, the friction fades enough that you stop tracking it. You begin believing the environment has corrected itself. That awareness solved the problem. Understanding the dynamics allowed you to neutralize them, and that belief creates a quiet relief. Because if transparency restores balance, then the system is fair, predictable, cooperative once the misunderstandings disappear. But something important remains hidden beneath that temporary calm. Nothing about the hierarchy around you has actually changed. The incentives that produced the earlier behavior are still there. Attention still moves the same way. Status still shifts the same way. Reputation still circulates through the same quiet channels. The environment simply adjusted to the version of you it now understands better, which means the tension didn't disappear. It paused, and when hierarchies pause, they are usually doing something else, observing, waiting to see whether the person who noticed the pattern will eventually stop watching it. For a while, the environment feels stable. Your explanations are clearer. Your tone is calmer. Conversations move forward without the small collisions that once followed you. You assume the adjustment worked. Then something strange happens. A concern appears, not an accusation. A concern. During a meeting, someone references a detail you once shared privately while explaining your approach to a project. They phrase it carefully. "I know you mentioned before that you worry about how people interpret your ideas." The sentence sounds supportive, understanding even. But the room hears something slightly different. What they hear is hesitation, doubt. The explanation you once gave to remove misunderstanding is quietly returned as evidence of uncertainty. No one challenges the framing. Why would they? The statement was presented as empathy, yet something subtle has changed. Information you once offered to stabilize perception has become part of the narrative others use to describe you. Later, the pattern sharpens. You hear your own explanation repeated again during another discussion. But this time, the structure is slightly altered. Someone paraphrases something you said weeks earlier about wanting to avoid miscommunication. The detail is correct. The meaning is not. The comment lands with a casual tone. He's always trying to make sure everyone understands him. A small laugh follows. The room reads the remark as insecurity, not precision. The words were yours, the interpretation is not. Narratives inside groups rarely need new material. They simply rearrange what already exists. At the same time, opportunities begin thinning out in ways that are difficult to measure. A meeting happens without you. Someone else represents the idea you originally developed. A conversation about a new project occurs somewhere you weren't present. When you hear about it later, the explanation sounds familiar. It came together quickly. The phrase appears again. Quick decisions, limited time, nothing personal. Yet the pattern stretches across weeks, then months. You're still present in the environment, still visible. But the frequency of certain invitations slowly declines. Access doesn't disappear, it narrows. And narrowing access rarely feels dramatic enough to confront. Eventually, another detail reaches you through someone else, a phrase circulating in quiet conversations. Nothing aggressive, just an impression. Some people think you're a little intense, not hostile, just descriptive. But descriptions have consequences. Because once a label begins circulating through a group, people start interpreting neutral behavior through it. Focused becomes rigid, direct becomes confrontational, silence becomes tension. You tried to remove misunderstanding by explaining yourself more clearly. You offered context, intentions, motivation. But the system around you adapted faster than you expected. Every explanation became information. Every clarification became material. And once that information began circulating beyond your control, it stopped functioning as protection. It became leverage. The strange part is that nothing happening around you looks openly hostile. People remain polite. Meetings continue. Conversations still happen. But the environment now contains a detailed map of your reasoning, your concerns, your intentions, a map you helped draw, which means something important has already changed. The system no longer needs to guess who you are. It already knows how to describe you. And once a hierarchy learns how to describe someone, it rarely stops repeating the description. Eventually, the pattern stops feeling isolated. At first, you thought each moment belonged to a different environment. Work had its own tensions. Friendships had their own dynamics. Social gatherings followed their own rules. Separate systems, separate explanations. But the same sequence begins appearing in all of them. You notice it one afternoon during a meeting. Someone delays a decision after agreeing with you earlier. The explanation is procedural. We should revisit this next week. A familiar pause enters the room. No disagreement, just delay. Later that evening, the same structure appears somewhere else. You're standing in a small group at a gathering. A conversation turns towards something you've been working on. Someone asks a question that sounds supportive. You answer calmly. Then another voice adds a comment slightly skeptical but wrapped in humor. The group laughs lightly. The structure feels strangely familiar. Agreement first, then subtle displacement, different environment, same rhythm, and the realization arrives slowly. This is not a series of accidents. It is a pattern that appears whenever your position inside a group begins to change. You notice something else during these moments. There is always someone nearby who sees it clearly. They stand slightly outside the center of the interaction, not participating, just watching. Their expression remains neutral. They hear the joke, they see the interruption, they recognize the shift in attention, but they say nothing. Observers inside hierarchies rarely intervene, not because they misunderstand the tension, because the tension is stabilizing something. When people reposition each other quietly, the hierarchy reorganizes itself without conflict. Interference would disturb that balance. So the observer remains silent, and silence, in these situations, becomes a form of approval. The next moment sharpens the pattern. During another gathering, someone makes a comment about you in front of several people. Not aggressive, just a remark placed carefully between humor and criticism. Yeah, he always takes things a little too seriously. Laughter follows, not loud, but enough to signal that the comment has landed successfully. Everyone glances briefly toward you. A small pause opens in the conversation. It's the kind of pause where people wait to see how you respond. You could challenge the comment, ask what they mean, correct the framing. But something stops you, because if you react strongly, the narrative they suggested suddenly gains proof. Serious, defensive, difficult. The description becomes real the moment you fight it openly, so you remain quiet. The conversation shifts away within seconds. Someone changes the topic. Drinks are refilled. The room relaxes again as if nothing happened. And that moment reveals the final structure hiding beneath all the others. Conflict inside groups rarely appears as confrontation, it appears as suggestion. A comment, a joke, a delay, just enough pressure to test how the room will interpret you. Then the moment dissolves. Conversation resumes. The system moves forward without ever acknowledging the tension that passed through it, which allows the pattern to repeat again, later, and again. Agreement followed by friction, humor followed by implication, support followed by quiet repositioning. Every move remains ambiguous enough to deny. No single action proves hostility, but together they create something far more stable than open conflict. A system where opposition survives through uncertainty, because uncertainty prevents accusation, and accusation is the only thing that could expose the structure clearly. But by the time you begin seeing the pattern across every environment, workrooms, friend groups, social gatherings, another realization begins forming beneath it. The moment you confront the pattern directly, you step perfectly into the identity the system has already been preparing for you. The gathering continues behind you. Music, conversation, glasses touching together in quiet rhythm. You step outside before the night ends, not abruptly, just earlier than usual. Someone near the door glances at you as you leave. For a brief second, your eyes meet. Their expression pauses in a way that's difficult to describe. Not suspicion, not friendliness, something closer to uncertainty. As if they are trying to calculate whether you noticed something that happened inside the room. You don't explain why you're leaving. You don't comment on the conversations that happened earlier. You simply nod once and walk outside. Most people interpret silence as disengagement. They assume the quiet person has mentally stepped away from the environment. But silence inside hierarchies rarely functions that way. Silence can also mean observation, and observation creates a particular kind of discomfort because people can argue with words. They can dismiss accusations, but they cannot easily control what someone might have noticed. The air outside is cooler. The sounds from the gathering follow you faintly down the street ladder, drifting through the open doorway, fragments of conversation dissolving into the night. Inside, the noise continues exactly as it did before you left. Nothing has stopped, nothing needed to, and as you walk, the earlier moments begin replaying in your mind with a different clarity. The meeting where agreement slowed into delay, the conversation where a joke quietly changed the room's perception, the friend who repeated something private for entertainment, the comment that placed a label on you while everyone watched your reaction. Individually, those moments once felt disconnected. Small irregularities, misunderstandings. Now the pattern between them feels precise. Agreement followed by friction, attention followed by displacement, support followed by quiet repositioning, not chaos. Structure. Hierarchies rarely defend themselves through open conflict. Open conflict exposes the contest. Instead, they correct imbalance through subtle coordination delays, jokes, omissions, implications, small movements that push someone back toward a manageable position inside the group. You didn't notice the system clearly at first. Most people don't, because the behavior hides inside normal interactions. Professional politeness, social humor, friendly teasing. But once the pattern becomes visible, something else changes. Your reactions become part of the environment people monitor. They expect irritation, defensiveness, a moment where pressure finally produces visible frustration. That reaction confirms the narrative already circulating about you. But the reaction never appears. Meetings end. Conversations shift. Jokes land and dissolve, and you remain still inside the moment. No visible resistance, no attempt to correct the framing, just observation, which produces a different kind of tension. Because a person who reacts emotionally can be categorized immediately, but someone who simply watches forces the room to wonder what exactly was understood. And uncertainty unsettles hierarchies more than confrontation ever could. You continue walking while the sounds of the gathering fade behind you. The system you just left is still operating exactly as it was before. Nothing about it has changed. You are still inside it, still part of the rooms, the conversations, the structures where those quiet adjustments happen. But one difference remains. You no longer interpret the behavior as coincidence. You see the coordination beneath it, the subtle enforcement, the defensive movements that appear whenever someone's presence begins altering the balance of attention inside a group. And that realization creates a position few people ever fully occupy. You remain within the system, but the system also knows something about you now. You are no longer just participating in the hierarchy, you are watching it.